No one in the dusty trading lanes of 7th century Arabia could have predicted that a string of revelations, alliances, and wars would redraw continents and reorganize human knowledge across a millennium. In the early 7th century, on the Arabian Peninsula and in the great cities that ringed it, empires and tribes jostled for trade and influence, while a new communal project quietly began to knit disparate peoples together. At its heart was a messenger from Mecca who articulated a vision that would expand outward for centuries to come. This is a story that spans 1,000 years across the Middle East and beyond, from desert caravans to library halls to sacked capitals. It matters now because modern borders, rivalries, and intellectual inheritances were shaped in the centuries that followed. Stay with the opening twist and you will see how a single social and religious movement became an engine for empire building, scientific translation, and global exchange, and how its echoes persist in politics and culture today. Before that movement crystallized, the Arabian Peninsula sat at the margins of two aging empires. To the north, the Byzantine state maintained coastal cities and Christianized polities, while to the east, the Sassanid realm controlled Perso-Mesopotamia and sought influence over caravan routes. Arab society was organized around tribal bonds and oral traditions. Nomads and settled merchants navigated oases and souks. In the markets of Himyar and the ports of southern Arabia, incense and spices moved toward the Mediterranean. Polytheistic shrines still clustered in towns, and the pilgrimage circuit included many gods and cults. The geography fostered resilience and mobility. You could smell camel sweat on woven tent flaps, hear goats bleating at dawn, see carved stone altars stained by soot, taste bitter coffee like the mixture of social life and ritual, feel the hot sand under sandals, and sense the anxiety of communities squeezed between imperial taxes and local feuds. This was a world primed for religious and political consolidation. Trade networks already linked Mecca, Yathrib, now called Medina, and the Syrian highlands. Episodes of drought, intertribal vendettas, and economic opportunity created the conditions for a message promising social cohesion to gain traction. Muhammad emerged from this world in 570 in Mecca. He was a merchant by trade and a member of the Quraysh clan. Historical accounts held that he received his first revelation in a cave outside the city. That moment transformed a private conviction into a public claim and initiated a period of intense contestation. Persecution in Mecca pushed his followers to migrate to Yathrib in 622, in an event called the Hijra that became a foundational turning point. In Medina, he negotiated pacts, adjudicated disputes, and organized communal prayer and charity. Early converts included close companions and family members who made the movement resilient through personal loyalty. Then, as opposition hardened, conflict and compromise defined the next decade. A brief, direct scene helps to feel the human exchanges that forged this early community. Khadija said to him, "I believe."
"What you say, and I will stand by you," he replied. "I am afraid, but your faith steadies me." Abu Bakr entered and said, "We will hold together. I will stand at your side." Muhammad answered, "Then we accept the risk and move forward." A neighbor asked, "What will you do if they strike?" And Abu Bakr responded, "We will protect the community." Muhammad said, "We must be just and patient." This string of exchanges was intimate and decisive. Sensory details lingered in memory. The scent of perfumed oil on cloak sleeves, the low chorus of camel footsteps outside, the cool cave stone under a hand, the metallic tang of fear in the mouth, the warmth of a hearth where plans were spoken, and the heavy hush of a night that felt like a hinge in history. Muhammad's background was shaped by loss, trade routes, and mediation. As a child, he lost his parents and was raised by his grandfather and later by his uncle. That orphan status cultivated early independence and observation. As a young man, he worked caravans to Syria and met Christians and Jews whose scriptures and rituals left impressions. He married Khadija, a wealthy widow, which gave him stability and status to reflect and receive visitors. The death of loved ones deepened his contemplative inclinations. The social fabric of Mecca exposed him to both elite wealth and widespread poverty, and this contrast informed his emphasis on social obligation and charity. During his prophetic period, he navigated family grief, political exile, and the practical challenges of building a plural community. Each stage hardened his leadership skills and clarified his priorities. In later years, his memory was invoked by chroniclers to explain how a merchant-turned-leader could manage treaties, mediate feuds, and inspire followers to long campaigns. These formative experiences made him credible to artisans and chieftains alike, and helped translate spiritual claims into a durable polity. After the prophet's death in 632, the community confronted a crisis of succession. The first caliphs, known as the Rashidun, tried to consolidate control while continuing expansion beyond the peninsula. Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali became central figures whose rivalries and policies shaped the early caliphate. They administered newly captured provinces, collected taxes, and attempted to create uniform practices of worship and governance. Conquest moved quickly. Armies crossed into Byzantine Syria and Sassanid Mesopotamia. Cities like Damascus and Kufa fell into new administrative systems. The practical business of governance required codifying accounts, sending envoys, and calming local elites. A reconstructed exchange in administrative tent shows the dynamic. Governor Yazid reported, "We need to collect revenue and pacify the province." Commander Khalid said, "We will secure the routes and install garrisons." Councillor Umar insisted, "We must respect local law to avoid revolt." Ali noted, "We must also ensure the mosques serve social cohesion." These conversations were not abstract. You could hear the clink of coin in wooden chests, smell cooking meat over open flame, taste stale bread.
In hurried meals, feel rough wool on cloaks as men argued, see the sunburned faces of troops, and sense the tension of leaders balancing conquest and legitimacy. Yet the question of who should succeed the prophet and who would claim religious authority seeded a long-lasting sectarian divide between those who supported Ali and those who recognized other lines of succession. The Umayyad dynasty transformed that initial expansion into a hereditary monarchy. With the capital moved to Damascus, governance became more centralized and dynastic. Umayyad rulers pressed westward into North Africa and across the Strait of Gibraltar into Iberia. They also faced limits, as at the Battle of Tours in 732, where Frankish resistance checked further European advance. Monumental architecture like the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem became symbols of political theology and imperial imagination. Within Umayyad courts, elite culture flourished alongside heavy taxation and Arabization of administration that alienated many non-Arab subjects. A scene in Damascus captures court life. A vizier asked, "What is the plan for the new province?" The general replied, "We will appoint Arab governors and collect tribute." A merchant warned, "This risks rebellion among local elites." The prince answered, "Then we will reward loyalty more generously." The room smelled of rosewater and heated oil lamps. The marble underfoot gleamed. The metallic echo of sandals punctuated plans. Sweet baklava suggested celebration, and the distant cry of a market reminded planners of the people they governed. Secondary figures emerged in this period: Yazid, son of Muawiyah; Abd al-Malik, who reformed currency; Tariq ibn Ziyad, who led the Iberian campaigns; Musa ibn Nusayr, who administered North Africa; and Marwan, who extended Umayyad authority. In 750, a revolutionary coalition overthrew the Umayyads, and the Abbasids founded a new caliphate that relocated its capital to Baghdad. Under Abbasid patronage, the House of Wisdom collected and translated texts from Greek, Persian, and Indian languages. Scholars like al-Khwarizmi developed algebra, and medical treatises circulated widely. The city became a cosmopolitan hub where silk, papyrus, and ideas mixed. Baghdad's markets hummed with the call to prayer and with music. Scribes mouthed Arabic while copying astronomical tables. The Caliph Harun al-Rashid became a symbol of prosperity and patronage, though later politics strained coherence. Administrative reform included a professional bureaucracy, postal systems, and scrutiny of fiscal records. Translation proceeded through networks. Scholars edited works whole cloth, adapted technical vocabulary, and created marginalia for future readers. A concise technical description explains the translation workflow. Manuscripts were acquired from courts and markets and examined by a team of bilingual scholars who produced annotated Arabic versions. Scribes then copied texts onto thicker paper, cataloged them, and stored them in the library with inventory lists. This process often took months and required patron funding and diplomatic exchange. The sensory texture of Baghdad was vivid. The paper dust settled on fingers, ink stained fingertips. The warm glow of lamps outlined bent heads. Spices scented reading halls, and the murmur of debate filled corridors. Yet even as culture blossomed, provincial governors grew more autonomous, and revenue pressures mounted. The Abbasid center began to lose tight control as regional dynasties asserted independence. Important secondary figures in this era included al-Ma'mun, who patronized translation, Ibn Sina, whose medical corpus traveled far, al-Kindi, who bridged Hellenic philosophy and Islamic thought, the vizier Yahya, and the scholar Thabit ibn Qura. Fragmentation accelerated as Turkish and Persian military elites rose to prominence. The Seljuks entered the stage, asserting military dominance in Anatolia and Persia, and placing a sultan's power alongside the symbolic caliph. Fatimid challenge in Egypt under a rival Shia dynastic claim shifted the center of political gravity in the eastern Mediterranean. Sultanates emerged, urban administrations adapted, and the role of ulama as interpreters of law became institutionalized. The psychological texture of this time included the rough slap of armored mail in training yards, the tang of sweat and leather, the metallic scent of swords, the geometry of madrasa courtyards, the chalk dust of jurists writing legal opinions, the bitter tea drunk in caravans, and the quiet lament of families displaced by campaigns. Secondary actors included the Seljuk Sultan Alp Arslan, who won at Manzikert, Nizam al-Mulk, the administrator who structured the state, the Fatimid Caliph al-Hakim in Cairo, and various local Ghulam commanders who held power in provincial cities. 3 moments of tension punctuated the medieval centuries, each forcing existential choices. The first arose when Western Crusaders landed in 1096 and stormed coastal cities. Local leaders asked whether to negotiate, resist, or ally with rival Muslim princes. Memories of defeat and calls for unity collided. A commander remembered earlier defeats and hesitated, while envoys argued urgency. The choice was to consolidate under a single banner or to preserve local autonomy. The second moment occurred as Mongol armies under Hulagu Khan approached in the 13th century. Witnesses described the air thick with smoke and the clang of siege engines. The rationale of resistance confronted the dread of annihilation. Debates inside councils turned on whether to flee, to defend Baghdad, or to negotiate terms. Third, the Ottoman rise presented new politics as Anatolian beyliks folded into a larger imperial apparatus. Elites recalibrated loyalties, choosing between local privileges and integration in a centralized Ottoman system. Each tension involved personal fear, tactical memory, and a decisive act that reshaped institutions and people's lives. The Crusades and the consequent responses created dramatic narratives. Saladin emerged in the late 12th century as a unifier who reclaimed Jerusalem in 1187 after decisive campaigns. A reconstructed exchange before a night battle captures resolve. Saladin asked his lieutenant, "What do we risk if we strike now?" The lieutenant answered, "If we wait, they may reinforce." A shopkeeper whispered, "They worship different gods, yet trade persists." Saladin replied, "We will spare civilians and restore markets." These dialogues reflected both military strategy and concern for civic life. Sensory impressions were acute. The hoofbeats of cavalry raised dust, incense from shrines wafted. Across camps, sword blades flashed. Bread changed hands in quick meals, and the cry of pigeons punctuated dawn. The Mongol sack of Baghdad in 1258 under Hulagu was catastrophic. The sound of burning libraries and collapsing roofs registered as an era ended. Yet Mamluk forces in Egypt halted Mongol penetration and preserved substantial Islamic polities. Later, the Ottoman dynasty consolidated Anatolia and captured Constantinople in 1453, creating a new imperial axis that lasted for centuries. Key characters in these chapters included Saladin, who negotiated Sunni unity, Richard the Lionheart as an adversary in the Levant, Hulagu Khan, who led Mongol conquests, Baybars, the Mamluk Sultan who defended Syria, and Mehmed the Conqueror, who transformed Byzantium into an Ottoman capital. A brief call to the audience now asks you to reflect on what you have heard and to engage. Which decision do you think most decisively shaped the course of this 1,000-year arc? Comment with A for the Hijra, B for the Umayyad reorganization, C for the Abbasid translation movement, or D for military responses like Saladin's campaigns. Your reply will help shape future episodes where we can deep dive into whichever turning point you choose. Many viewers report that choosing a letter sparked new debates in the comments and brought forward family memories or readings that enrich discussion. By commenting, you also help indicate which secondary figures you want profiled: Abu Bakr, Umar, Harun al-Rashid, Saladin, Ibn Sina, or Mehmed. Back to the narrative. The next chapters show how knowledge and institutions spread and adapted under pressure. The later medieval centuries reshaped economic life and scholarly exchange. Merchants from Cairo to Samarkand connected raw materials and luxury goods. Medical schools, observatories, and mathematical treatises circulated in caravans and court libraries. Legal scholars refined jurisprudence, while political elites experimented with taxation and land grants. Secondary figures here included merchants like Ahmad al-Tiflisi, jurists such as al-Ghazali who critiqued philosophers, engineers who designed irrigation works, and sailors who navigated the Indian Ocean monsoon. Administrative techniques evolved, giving rise to practices of record-keeping, land surveys, and official correspondence that held empires together even when frontiers shifted. The epilogue returns in 3 temporal beats, showing immediate reverberations and longer-term legacy. 1 month later, local communities felt the practical effects. Scholars, merchants, and soldiers reacted quickly. In Cairo, the merchant Fatima reported shortages of certain spices and organized a caravan to secure supplies. In Baghdad, the scribe Mansur cataloged the recent acquisitions for a private library and worried about patronage. In Damascus, families awaited grain allotments, and the local Qadi Aisha negotiated disputes over property. The atmosphere was tense but adaptive. People exchanged letters, shared news at public baths, and repaired damaged roofs. The protagonist's community felt both relief over survival and anxiety about future stability. The streets smelled of wood smoke and wet stone after repairs, food rations were sparse but shared, voices in markets debated what came next, and children played amid ruins even as elders recounted losses. These small acts signaled resilience, and the network of trade and scholarship began to reconnect. 3 months later, larger patterns emerged. In major cities, scholars resumed copying texts and adapted older treatises to new circumstances. In Samarra, the bureaucrat Yusuf implemented reforms to streamline tax collection and named deputies to oversee grain stores. In Aleppo, the artisan Nasir organized guilds to rebuild craft production. Public lectures resumed in mosques and madrasas, and new legal opinions addressed wartime commerce. Reactions varied. Merchants petitioned for tariff relief, ulama argued over orthodoxy, and local governors negotiated with neighboring rulers for safe passage. The tone had shifted from immediate repair to planning and institutional reform. The protagonist observed hope mixed with fatigue and recognized that the social order would require adjustments not only of policies but of memory. Conversations in tea houses resumed, and libraries reopened their doors to new students. 6 months on, the consequences were firmer. Trade routes had re-established links, and a new generation of scholars traveled from Cordoba to Baghdad to exchange manuscripts. In Istanbul, artisans began to emulate architectural elements from earlier palaces, and patrons like Emir Hassan funded translations that blended Greek, Persian, and indigenous knowledge. The community leaders, like the Qadi Aisha, the merchant Fatima, and the scholar Mansur, formed alliances to sponsor public works. Politically, some rulers consolidated authority, while others renegotiated autonomy with central powers. The protagonist felt a cautious optimism and a deeper understanding that history moved in cycles of rupture and restitution. The enduring legacy was visible in city plans, legal codes, and in the centuries of intellectual exchange that inspired later European renaissances. Contemporary scholars at institutions like the British Library and the National Museum of Antiquities in Leiden continued to study manuscripts revealing incremental continuities with that distant epoch. In closing, the story began on an arid peninsula and reverberated across continents. Over 1,000 years, the movement centralized worship and governance, created empires, supported a golden age of translation and science, and weathered devastating military losses. The consequence was a layered civilization whose institutions sultans, caliphs, scholars, and merchants built and rebuilt. Today, we still inherit legal traditions, mathematical concepts, and architectural forms that trace back to these centuries. If you found this narrative illuminating, subscribe to follow deeper episodes where we unpack individual figures and moments. Leave a comment with the letter of the turning point you think mattered most, and share which secondary character you would like profiled next. History is not a closed book. It is a living conversation, and your voice matters.